Hello, dear viewers, and welcome to a new edition of Business Insider. I am Amb Medhat El Meligy. The president of the African Development Bank, the AFDB Group, Mr. Akinwumi Adesina, has praised what he called the brave decisions made by His Excellency President Sisi to accelerate achievements in the field of renewable energy. This came within the African Development Bank's 2023 annual meetings being held under the theme mobilizing private sector financing for climate and green growth in Africa. Of course, the 2023 meetings are being held in the Red Sea resort of Sharm el-Sheikh, and we will be talking about those meetings in this episode, and also about the Egyptian and African efforts to lure foreign investments, direct and indirect foreign investments. That will be our main theme here in the program. But first, and as always, we begin with a look at the latest stories making the economic headlines. And the CEO of the General Authority for Investment and Free Zones, GAFI, Mr. Hussein Heba, has said that the volume of foreign investments flowing into Egypt has hit $22 billion recently, and that is the highest in Egypt's history. This came during the first session of a discussion panel of the Private Investment Committee, which is held within the framework of the National Dialogue. Mr. Heba said this shows that Egypt is capable of luring more investments. He noted that the net direct foreign investment stood at $8.9 billion, which is the best record in the past 10 years. And Irrigation Minister Dr. Henny Swelem has praised the long history of cooperation between Egypt and the Netherlands, which dates back to the 70s in the field of water and agriculture. A joint cooperation deal has been sealed between the Ministry's National Water Research Center and Dutch Wageningen University and De Latres in Applied Water Research, ACA Water GCAR. Mr. Swelem was speaking during a workshop to launch a plan of action meant to assess the impact of irrigation development and scientific innovations on the water sector here in Egypt. He said that Egypt greatly appreciated the Dutch support so as to be able to deal with future water challenges through integrated management and upgraded strategies. And Migration and Egyptian Expatriates Affairs Minister Soha El-Gindi hailed cooperation with Germany, describing it as a successful one, especially in the field of training and rehabilitation of the Egyptian labor field. This came during her meeting with German ambassador in Cairo, Mr. Frank Hartmann, to discuss fostering bilateral relations between Egypt and Germany in the upcoming period. She said that the Egyptian-German cooperation had achieved great outcome, including the establishment of the Egyptian-German Center for Jobs, Migration and Reintegration, EGC, in cooperation with the GIZ. She also said she hoped to continue fostering cooperation in the fields of mechanism to adapting migration of labor with the THAM program and increasing rates of job opportunities, training and rehabilitation to meet the needs of the job markets. Time now for a short break, and when we come back, we'll be introducing you to our distinguished guests who will be joining us with us in the studio to discuss our main topic for tonight, the annual meetings of the African Development Bank and the Egyptian and African efforts to try and lure more foreign direct and indirect investments. Please stay with us. Welcome back, dear viewers, and thank you for staying with us. With us now here in the studio is His Excellency Ambassador Medhat El Meligy, Egypt's former ambassador to Cameroon. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Ambassador. And allow us, please, and allow us, dear viewers, first to watch a report on the main topic for tonight, the African Development Bank's meetings and the Egyptian African efforts to try and lure more foreign direct and indirect investments, and then come back.
Egypt has many advantages as an investment destination. Geostrategic location, land availability, solar and wind power capacity, skilled human capital, as well as big domestic market. It can easily serve as a manufacturing hub for Africa and MENA region. In Egypt, investment can be in real estate, tourism, agricultural, oil and gas, and renewable energy. Egypt has been making important steps in the direction of increasing investment. At the economic conference last October, the Prime Minister affirmed that improving the investment climate remains one of the hardest challenges facing the country, and that the government would be making considerable efforts to attract investment through regulatory changes and upgrading infrastructure. A good example of the latter is, of course, with the development of the Suez Canal economic zone. The agreement with the IMF and the recently announced economic reforms and policy initiatives such as the state ownership policy, the competitive neutrality principle, the forthcoming new industrial and hydrogen policies point towards new investment framework in Egypt. The EU responds positively to such policies. The global development, COVID war in Ukraine, climate change have led to the EU to review its trade and investment strategy and focus more on the need to nearshore supply chains and to secure new sources of supply for energy with an emphasis on renewable energies and low-carbon fuels. The volume of British investments in Egypt reached $20 billion with more than 1,500 companies operating in various sectors, according to UK Ambassador to Egypt, Gareth Bailey. Thanks to its strategic location, the Suez Canal, green hydrogen potential, as well as wind energy and solar energy productions, Egypt has promising opportunities for British companies to pump investments, added the senior British diplomat. Egypt is the largest country of the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development operations in the Mediterranean region. The EBRD has financed 163 projects since it began operations in the country. This is in addition to the huge Gulf and Asian investments in Egypt.
Thank you very much, Rasha Abdelhamid and Abir Hussein, for this report. And back here in the studio with Ambassador Medhat El Meligy, Egypt's former ambassador to Cameroon. Mr. Ambassador, I remember very well in the turn of 2019-2020, when Egypt was about to surrender the rotating presidency of the African Union, that His Excellency President Al-Sisi had said that, you know, Egypt is staying with Africa and it will continue its leading role in Africa, and it will continue to be Africa's voice globally. How do you think that such a meeting like the African Development Meeting taking place in Sharm el-Sheikh is just a little glimpse or evidence or significance indeed of Egypt's continuing efforts to be the voice of Africa and to lead the efforts to move the African continent forward?
Well, you just mentioned within your question, actually, I mean, that Egypt's presence in Africa and its collaboration with most, if not all, the African countries doesn't have to do anything actually with the rotation presidency. The rotation is just for having a voice of each African country to represent the continent in various fields, various international fields. But this doesn't have any effect on Egypt's role in Africa from long time, especially with President Al-Sisi, who vowed himself to serve Africa and to be the voice of Africa ever since he took over the presidency. So in this regard, it's very important to reassure the Egyptians, first of all, our commitment to Africa. whether in the field of development, as we're going to be talking about, or in various other fields. It has been our role as ambassadors of Egypt, me and my colleagues all over Africa, to voice this Egyptian will to continue its effort with Africa in all fields and domains to help them with ferocity, actually, and with good commitment. And the African countries have recognized the efforts of Egypt in all the fields. When, for instance, when His Excellency President Sisi spoke about the green energy and all the how can I say it? I mean the long-lasting development plans in Africa. He said that I'm talking on behalf of Africa. When he said it recently in the COP27, that was a very big success.
Right.
And now he is repeating the same thing. We heard his speech in the meetings, the annual meetings of the African Bank of Development. It voiced the same intention to continue to help the African countries. So I think Egypt's role in Africa, and I'm talking here from a position where I could say this as an Egyptian ambassador to Africa in one of the African countries, I am sure that we really mean that, and we really mean business. And if we take a look at the recommendations by the last reunion that took place in Sharm el-Sheikh regarding the African Bank of Development, it definitely reassures the African countries that Egypt is still on the same line.
Right, and we're going to be talking about this shortly, but because you took us back to COP27, and I wanted to go back to November, also in Sharm el-Sheikh. Egypt, in fact, was also talking about reparations. It wanted to see Africa receiving a fair treatment, because Africa is not the reason why there is global warming or climate change. It is not the one emitting CO2, but it is suffering. It is the one that has most suffered from those emissions. So again, in COP27, indeed, Egypt was a leading voice for Africa, as it has continued to do so. Now, Mr. Ambassador, 81 members of the African Development Bank Board of Governors are attending this year's annual meetings. We have governors of central banks, finance ministers, senior private sector members, officials, academics, development partners, and experts. What are we expecting from these meetings? What is it that you want to see?
Well, first of all, as the Vice President of the African Bank of Development mentioned, that Africa needs approximately around 150 billion US dollars per year until the year 2030 to adjust itself to the green energy and more and less carbon emissions and so on. And this actually was the reason why this meeting focused on the mixed funds.
Yes.
Why the mixed funds? Because actually the bank on itself or the governmental multilateral banks cannot do it on its own. And that's why they needed the private sector. I mean, it needs everyone's involvement so that we can reach the level where we can say, yes, we managed to reach a certain level of sustainable development with less emission of carbon dioxide. And I think that this shows, or this actually show us why is everybody focused on this point, because there is, although you mentioned that Africa is not the first responsible for the emission of CO2, but it's part of it, and we want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. Actually, the reality is that maybe the African countries are paying the price of other countries, mainly the Western countries, who are emitting more than what they should. And we are the one feeling the consequences of these tactics and these politics. So with the figures needed and the lack...
That's a lot of money.
Exactly.
A lot of money.
And
needed.
lack of sustainable funds for this long period. We are talking about 2030, so we're talking about 7 years again. and 150 billion per year. And all this is not just for projects, development projects and others, but it's for lesser carbon emissions. So we have to balance, and this is when the role of Egypt will come, so that we can call and we can speak in the name of the African with the rest of the world that we need some help. The African Bank of Development is doing its best. I have seen many projects that they are helping with in African countries. Maybe this will actually push me a little bit to say that we Egyptians, to work a little bit closer with the bank to be able to help the African countries with our technologies, with our manpower, with our innovation ideas that we have to help the Africans to surpass this hurdle. And we need the bank, but we need to work closely with it, closer than before.
Right. Mr. Ambassador, the theme for this year's annual meetings is mobilizing private sector financing for climate and green growth in Africa. Can you talk to us about the significance of having this as a theme for this year's meetings? Mobilizing private sector financing for climate and green growth.
The private sector was always waiting for governmental efforts to start or to lead the way. And as you just mentioned, that the amounts required are humongous. And because of this, we need the private sector to be more involved so that he can help as well. And that's from this what brought the term of mixed funds, because we want the private sector to be involved as well. And this was the theme, one of the themes of the conference that we had in Sharm el-Sheikh a few days ago. And the private sector need to be more implemented. And this is what I have been even calling for when I was in Cameroon, that the private sector, and here allow me to talk about Egypt, since I'm Egyptian before and foremost, that the Egyptian private sector need to be more involved and not to wait too long. There are many other countries that are from outside the continent who are doing perfect efforts, to be honest. And when I see the share of Egypt in many of those projects that we can do and we are capable of doing, I see that our contribution is less than what it should. And here I'm calling upon the businessmen of Egypt and the private sector in Egypt to start to look seriously and more seriously to Africa. His Excellency the President have said it ever since he took office, that the private sector need to be involved with me. And he mentioned also the importance of implementing new strategies with African countries. The Africans are waiting for us. So it's our turn really to be more eager to do projects and to do things. Whether we are talking about green energy or we are talking about conventional projects and development plans.
Right.
There is always room and there is a huge space for Egypt to be present. There is, and this is very important, there is a respect for the Egyptian role in the African continent. We are the one who are always having the slogan of win-win projects and win-win development plans. And because of this, the African trust us when we want to work with them. It's different than other countries that might come with every manpower, know-how and everything, and they give you a turnkey project, which actually doesn't benefit the African countries as much. But when you do a project, a mixed project between Egypt and other African countries, that's when they learn and that's when they get the know-how to enable them to promote themselves better in the market, in the international market.
Right.
So I am sure that we need to raise awareness in the private sector of Egypt that you have to be involved and even more involved than before.
Right, and since we mentioned here the importance of the role of the private sector, we have to mention the decisions that were taken on the 16th of May by the newly structured Supreme Council for Investment here in Egypt. 22 decisions to be exact, and they focus really on the importance of the private sector and try to give incentives to the private sector. There are some draft laws that are awaiting approval from Parliament, and even the World Bank recently, this past couple of days, praised these 22 decisions and said that they indicate that Egypt is serious now when it talks about, pushing the private sector really to where it should be, because the private sector should be the driving engine. Your comments, sir?
Well, it's very simple. I mean, I don't want to go through in details to the 22 points that were mentioned, but let's say that the state, the government, try to ease and remove any obstacles in front of the private sector to excel. I mean, we have some incentives in the field of taxations,
right,
other in the legislative field,
right,
other in
the golden licenses,
for instance,
yes,
and in various sectors,
right.
And I think that the private sector should understand now that the state and the government means business, and if those were the reason before why you couldn't really be more involved in Africa, here are some more incentives and some obstacles removed.
Right.
It's your time now to show us what you can do. Because, I mean...
Africa is a big market, isn't it?
It is a huge market. I mean, many African countries are importing, for instance, over 70 and 80% of their needs from the outside world. And there is a perfect share for us in all these projects.
I mean, when you were ambassador in Cameroon, and of course you also headed the mission in the Central African Republic, did you feel that our African brothers are thirsty for our involvement, for our technology know-how, investments, joint projects?
I don't want to be pessimistic, but actually this was the only thing that every minister was talking to me about. I mean, some minister would tell me, we are ready for any project, just name the project that you want from us and tell us if any data is needed. And I have said it in previous reviews and even in some magazines that when I was questioned,
yes,
that please let the embassies do the work that you need to know so that you can get involved. I mean, if you need to know any data, ask the embassies. This is what we are there for. We have embassies all over Africa. I mean, people have this thing, and maybe this will enable me to talk a little bit about the role of our embassies. Especially
do we still have commercial representatives?
Not all over Africa. I mean, for instance, in Cameroon, there was not. I was doing this work, and I received many emails and phone calls, and sometimes someone would get my number from a friend or something and call me. I am a businessman and I am interested in export. Do you have a partner for me? And
but this means that we might need commercial representatives all over Africa.
We definitely need, but for the time being, I mean, why would I need a commercial attaché if there is no demand? What I want to raise is the demand first. I want to have people who wants to do business and asking me.
There is a demand from the African side.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. I mean, whether we're talking, I mean, I will talk about the countries that I serve.
Please,
I mean,
please.
like in Cameroon and Central African Republic, every minister I would meet, he would be asking me, why Egypt is not present here? Why do we see other countries? I don't want to name names, but other countries who are working, whether from the African continent, other countries from the African continent, or from other continents. And they are doing a very good job, and they have a very good reputation, and some of them even made consortiums there.
And Cameroon is a big African country.
It's one of the biggest in Central Africa. In Central Africa, Cameroon is the key country of all the countries, you know, all the six, seven, it's the leading country. As you know, there is one currency for all the the Central African countries. It's one currency. I mean, if you move from Cameroon to Central African Republic or to Chad or to
Niger,
Guinea Equatorial or Congo,
Congo.
You will have the same currency. I mean, you take your money and you just spend it there, and you don't need to transfer any money. Of course, it's not the best thing because, as you know, it's made by the French. It's not a secret. It's the French that is making this money for the African countries. That's why they are managing to hold it stable with the euro. There is a good relation between them. They are linked together. But this should not be an obstacle. On the contrary, this should be something that we can benefit from, because this currency can be transferred to other currencies. So I mean, if you take this and transfer it, there is a possibility. I mean, because some businessmen were worried that maybe when I make my profit, I cannot transfer it to Egypt. No, this is not the case, for instance. The idea is that go and ask the embassies, send them telegrams, go to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here and ask them to ask this or that embassy in this or that country, and present the demand. And if the embassy doesn't do its work, this is another issue, but they will. They will, because we are all eager to implement the strategy that was put by our leadership, that they want to be involved in Africa. And we have to be involved in Africa. I mean, if we switch to football, we cannot go to the World Cup if we don't go through Africa. So Africa is our main door and our golden gate to the rest of the world.
Of course, going to the World Cup will be easier in the upcoming years because Africa will have more seats, of course. So there is a chance that Egypt and Senegal would go together. Of course, we remember that you were the head of your ambassador in Cameroon in the African Cup of Nations, of course.
Exactly.
When last year when Senegal won the championship against Egypt, and of course later qualified at the expense of Egypt. But of course, as we love success for Senegal, we also want success for Egypt.
Exactly.
This will happen, inshallah, in the upcoming years. Now, the finance minister, Mr. Ambassador Dr. Mohammed Maït, has said that Egypt dedicates all its potentials, abilities, and expertise to serve what he called the African brethren within the framework of keenness to support aspirations of the African people to achieve comprehensive and sustainable development, especially in the light of the economic challenges. There are a lot of challenges facing the world today. The COVID-19 made it tough. The Russia-Ukraine crisis made it even tougher. And Africa was the one that paid the heaviest price, probably in both crises. So what is it that we can do here in Egypt with Africa to serve? We have a common destiny, obviously.
Okay. Let me give you an example, and from this example you can take many more. Cameroon, for instance, is a country that is known for, and not just Cameroon, actually, most of Central African countries are known for having woods and forests. And they export wood, but actually, most of the wood they export is a tree trunk. It is not a semi or full fabricated wood. This is 1/10 of its value. So, I mean...
There is no added value.
Exactly. Accordingly, if, for instance, Egypt would to be building a factory to have a finished product, actually, this will come as a surprise. I mean, we are one of the world's biggest wood importer. And those countries, Central African countries, are one of the biggest exporters of wood. Why don't we have an Egyptian factory there? So far, we've been working on this, but it didn't bear any fruit yet. Why we don't have a factory yet? If we have a factory, we would have our own wood with a cheaper price.
That's a win-win.
Exactly, and you will transfer technology, and moreover,
you'll give added value to the natural resources that those Central African countries have. It's a win-win.
The excess of the product can be sold elsewhere. Instead of us buying the African wood from third countries, could be European even. And this is an example of the obstacles that they have. The idea of the African countries is a supplier of raw material. This has to change. And in order to change, you have to have someone who cares about you, and who is better than Egypt to care about other African countries. So the idea of transferring technologies from Egypt to the African countries so they can sustain themselves and stop being just an exporter of raw material will definitely help them. First, it would raise the value because there will be an added value to the raw material and the product. And second, because this will enable them to make more projects with the more money they will get. And at the same time, this will enable us to get products instead of having it done or semi finished products with higher prices. This will enable you, if you do have a factory there, or if you put one of your business centers there, this will enable you to get the raw material even with cheaper price.
Indeed.
I think we both need, whether we are talking about Egypt or African countries,
we need each other
to change strategies about the way we think. The idea is not how much this or that raw material costs, because at the end of the day, and this is a very important thing, it's not the African countries who are deciding the price of the product. It is not decided by us. The raw material has never been decided price-wise in Africa. Has been a little bit north of Africa, where is decided. So it's a win-win, as you just mentioned. It's a win-win. We will win.
We need each other. We need each other.
And that's why the president is so keen on involving the private sector, because the government and the state cannot do this on its own.
The private sector is the one that has the innovation, the creation, the ideas. You just gave a perfect example, one I'm sure of many, many examples of potential cooperation that could benefit both sides.
So there is an opportunity. Egypt's willingness to hold that meeting here in Egypt, the annual meeting of the African Development Bank, shows that Egypt wants to make things moving and shows that they want to raise awareness about the importance of Africa among the business sectors. And once you manage to make the Egyptian private sector see the opportunities that are available in Africa, that's when we succeed, and then we will start also winning.
Together.
But unless we do that, then we are blowing in a...
We have to do that.
Big problem.
We have to do that together.
Exactly.
Inshallah. Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Ambassador Medhat El Meligy, Egypt's former ambassador to Cameroon. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you
sir, very much.
Thank you.
And thank you, dear viewers, for watching Business Insider. Next week, same time, inshallah, is a new episode. Until then, have all the best and goodbye.